If you were an adherent, no one would be able to tell. You would look like any other American. You could be a mother, picking leftovers off your toddler's plate. You could be the young man in headphones across the street. You could be a bookkeeper, a dentist, a grandmother icing cupcakes in her kitchen. You may well have an affiliation with an evangelical church, but you are hard to identify just from the way you look, which is good because someday soon dark forces may try to track you down. You understand this sounds crazy, but you don't care. You know that a small group of manipulators, operating in the shadows, pull the planet's strings. You know that they are powerful enough to abuse children without fear of retribution. You know that the mainstream media are their handmaidens, in partnership with Hillary Clinton and the secret denizens of the deep state. You know that only Donald Trump stands between you and a damned and ravaged world. You see plague and pestilence sweeping the planet and understand that they are part of the plan. You know that a clash between good and evil cannot be avoided, and you yearn for the great awakening that is coming. So you must be on guard at all times. You must shield your ears from the scorn of the ignorant. You must find those who are like you, and you must be prepared to fight. You know all this because you believe in Q. From Adrian LaFrance, writing in The Atlantic.
Hey, Ben,
Hey, what?
I know who killed JFK.
Yeah. Well, it was the Cubans, right?
Yeah, it was the Cubans. No, it's the Cubans in February, and it's the CIA in March. I don't know. Guys, so we started off with a serious tone here, because this stuff is serious.
Right.
We have conspiracy stuff sweeping across not just our country, but the globe, honestly.
That's right. So today we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. We're going to talk about why leaders and organizations should care about them, because this is not just a societal issue. It's not just an issue about, your family and your friends, although those are very big concerning components of this issue. This is an issue that affects all of us. And I think that, most of our lived lives and our understanding of the world, or much of it, comes through our organizations and comes through the leaders around us and comes through the people we interact with. So this is a big topic. So we're going to talk about it today.
Right. And it actually has to do with organizations and people thriving. So two pieces, though. The articles that we reference in any of our episodes are in the show notes. So if you want to get those, but this is the Atlantic article that we referenced there and that Ben quoted from at the beginning of the episode is one of the better articles on the QAnon thing. So if you've somehow been in a hole for the last 4 years or whatever, this would be a good cliff notes to get you back up to speed.
That's right. So today we're going to talk about what is a conspiracy theory. We're going to talk about why do conspiracy theories matter and why we should care as leaders in our communities and organizations. And we're going to try to address what we can do about conspiracy theories. So let's start off with a little bit of definitional work in terms of what are we talking about when we talk about conspiracy theories. And we came up with, we found a few good definitions, some good research out there. People study this, right? People in political science, in political philosophy, people in criminal justice, psychology, a wide range of disciplines have and continue to study the phenomenon of conspiracy theories, which, by the way, is not a new phenomenon. It may have come to the forefront of many of our consciousnesses lately, but it's been around for a while, right? This probably as long as people have been around. There's even an article we came across, more of an evolutionary psychology perspective, which suggested that, conspiracy theories were helpful for us when we lived in small groups and we were trying to understand what was happening, and we had to be very attuned to threats that were out there. But let's try to define this so we can know what we're talking about.
Yeah. So conspiracy thinking is actually a positive. And listeners may be like, what? It shows that we're imaginative. Our minds, when we don't have enough information, go into imagination mode. We cover a lot of this in the crisis communication stuff that we did from some of the CDC's material back when the pandemic was just breaking out, right? Mm-hmm. How you communicate, how you behave in an environment when there's imperfect information, because you have to make a decision now, right?
Yeah.
Think of any horror movie. Some guy's in the house and you can't get out of the new mansion you just bought, right? Not only is the character in the show's mind going crazy, your mind as a watcher is going, What are they going to do? The dude's in the kitchen. He's got a knife. Some bad version of Clue regurgitated over and over again.
Right. So let's use one of these definitions that we came across, which comes from an article by Cass Sustein and Adrian Vermeulen of Harvard. And then we'll put a link to that article in the show notes, of course. But how they define a conspiracy theory is as follows, and I quote, "A conspiracy theory can generally be counted as such if it is an effort to explain some event or practice by reference to the machinations of powerful people who attempt to conceal their role, at least until their aims are accomplished," end quote. And I think that's a good umbrella way for us to at least begin this conversation around what conspiracy theories are. So, when, for example, you made the joke about we talked about JFK, right? That's a common conspiracy theory. People trying to figure out who actually killed President John F. Kennedy back in the 1960s here in the United States, and there's this idea that maybe there's this group of powerful people. The CIA was in on it, and other types of groups that collaborated and they conspired to make this happen for some reason, right? And either nefarious or not. And you can see that element in other conspiracy theories that are out there.
Yeah, one common element is its unfalsifiability.
Right. Well, what do you mean by unfalsifiability?
Yeah, so this is the idea that, hey, Ben, you and your family are actually Russian spies. And well, what evidence do you have of that? I mean, you can just tell. Look at how well behaved their children are.
Yeah.
You get yeah. I mean,
I don't know if
that's
that's I don't know if that's the best. I don't know if that's the best evidence, but
But the point is evidence doesn't have to actually be there. Our elections were stolen. Okay, where's the evidence? Oh, we don't have anything for the 60 some odd court cases. And it's implication of nefarious intent without basis. Now, maybe you could say, well, maybe they have that idea, but how would we know? You could literally make up a conspiracy about everything. McDonald's is actually the front for a, I don't know, pro Erdogan Turkey faction. And they've kept it all secret. You see
Right.
what I'm saying? Like,
well,
I
and
could
because
just,
right because the reason it's unfalsifiable usually is because the lack of evidence for the claim of the conspiracy theorist is evidence itself that it exists.
yeah,
Right?
well said.
Yeah. So
Well, there's no evidence. Well, that's the point.
Well, of
Don't
course
you?
there's not.
Of course there would be. And very quickly, you disappear into the realm of disinteresting unreality, right? Well, that's just your opinion, man.
Mhm.
And everybody has all these opinions, but then what is the basis that we can talk about anything?
Right.
About anything. And so the EU actually, because they're a little bit ahead of the thing where the government's actually talking about, hey guys, here's how we might know about conspiracies, right?
Right.
And so
we
they
put
have
a link to we put a link to this in the show notes too. They have a great website talking all about conspiracy theories.
right. So there's always an alleged secret plot. Like your neighbor plans to walk his dog tomorrow at 4:30 a.m.
Hmm.
Well, that's no conspiracy. He's walking his dog. That's what he does, weird early riser, right?
Right.
So there's no
Well,
plot.
and if we use some of the examples that are going on right now in the United States, which has even kind of crept abroad as well, there are some adherents of this as well outside of the United States. This idea of QAnon, that there is this secret group of people in high positions of power who are trafficking children and all kinds of other things. And there's also these alleged secret plots that somebody is going to save all of us. And most notably for that conspiracy theory, it happens to be Donald Trump. So it's very interesting. But you're right that as the EU notes, conspiracy theories have that alleged secret plot as one of their key elements.
Yeah. And I think that just speaks to the fact that our mind just doesn't know something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's got to be some order behind all this stuff rather than random stuff just happening.
Which shows how it appeals directly to those who maybe feel angry, those who feel afraid, those who feel powerless. These types of ideas that, it's not you know, due to luck or some other thing that these bad things are happening. It's because, you know, there's this group that is keeping us all down. So these conspiracy theories can be very attractive for that. And then, you know, the second element that these have in common is that there's this group of conspirators, right? That's another piece of it.
Right. And the third one is evidence that seems to support the conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, people, when you talk to people that are lost in the conspiracy land, it's like, what was that movie? A Beautiful Mind, where he
Yeah.
has all the papers. And you can almost see this on their Facebook pages or Twitter feeds. It's almost like they've got the giant layout of pictures and words with the yarn stringing everywhere. And and they're going nuts on these details. But the fact of the matter is, their anxieties are high, their sense making functions of their brain are on overdrive, and they're lost on this gerbil wheel of just running round and round circle. What about this? And what about this? And what about this? So where the QAnon guys even get together for conferences to share their obtuseness. Oh no,
Mm-hmm.
man. And then Kamala was there and she had rented a moped, and you could tell from the pizza receipt when the cost of the pizza was $9.97. That was short for 1997, which meant uh, and you're down the you're lost. You're lost
Right.
at that point.
Yeah. The fourth element here is that they falsely suggest that nothing happens by accident and that there are no coincidences, nothing is as it appears, and everything is connected.
Yeah, sometimes it's just it's lame feeling. It doesn't have the emotional catharsis to say, you know what? Sometimes stuff just happens and it stinks.
Right.
I remember before we were leaving Afghanistan, um, one of the C-147s, or those big planes, right? They had all the gear. Some of the gear had come unlashed on takeoff, and it flew to the back, and that plane crashed, and everybody on it died.
Yep. I remember that.
That that was it was horrible. Everybody was probably countrywide, but definitely on Camp Eggers where we were was just, what do you say to that?
Mm-hmm.
And you search, your brain is like trying to bust your head through a brick wall over and over. Why? How? Why? And we know how, like, hey, it just came unlashed. That fell back and they're dead. And you can't make sense of it. And your mind just keeps trying like a broken record, just over. Why? How? Why? How? Why? How? And so when we're in life, especially we're in a pandemic and a bit of a recession here, depending on, what type of job you got and all this kind of stuff. And we have like a very odd presidency that rules itself by tweet. And everybody's just why, how, why, how? Except now they're not stuck with just an isolated event like a plane crash. They're stuck with this broader, complex economy, healthcare, jobs, politicians, work, family life, because you have somebody moved in with you because of pandemic. They can't. Your life is on the fritz, and your sense making is just like, why? How? Only you are in a ripe world full of complex relationships, many of which are just cuz. Why'd
Mm-hmm.
you run into that lady at the coffee shop? But just because she happened to get a coffee at the same time, not because she was sent here by a Russian informant who knew a guy named Petrov. No,
Mm-hmm.
no.
Right. So, you know, there's this element of everything is happening for a reason, and there's this kind of hidden reality. A fifth element of conspiracy theories that they have in common that the EU suggests here is that they divide the world into good and bad. And, you know, you can see that in particular with recent events, with regard to, you know, the conspiracy theorists surrounding, you know, various things in the United States, be it QAnon or others, where it's like, hey, here's what we got to do as the good guys. Here's what the bad people are doing, and that's another way in which they make sense of the world.
Yeah. This is also known as black and white thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it is what we call a cognitive distortion. And this is a whole, cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the few therapies that modalities that insurance will cover because it's evidence based and has a good basis. And a big piece of cognitive behavioral therapy is getting rid of what we like to call stinking thinking, right?
Hmm.
Black and white thinking. Nobody is all bad and nobody is all good. That's just not how it works. Or if you come, and this is what's odd to me when I see this in people, Christian individuals, because one of the scriptures says, all man has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, right? And so right there in scripture, if you're a Bible believer, it is just shows that there's no such thing, at least on this earth with humanity, where
Hmm.
there's somebody's all good or bad. And yet we attribute that, and some of this comes from in group, out group thinking. The out group is all bad. It's easier for me to justify shortcutted thinking when I'm able to give short shrift to the complexity of the person sitting across from me.
Right. This is where we start thinking about other groups or other people as them. This other group of people, be it those people on the left or the right, or this political party or that political party. And going along with that, the sixth piece of this from the European Union is that, conspiracy theories scapegoat people and groups. They assign blame to certain people or groups for the world's problems and for various other issues that are going on in society.
Yeah, I see this all the time. Like, we'll just take the Republicans. And a lot of media that I like the Atlantic or the Republican Party is, I don't know. Last time I saw people like Mitt Romney, who you lauded for standing up and for voting to impeach Trump. Well, he didn't seem like them Republicans, but he has an R by his name. Are you sure? Are we talking about the fiscal conservatives or the evangelical bloc? Yeah, it breaks down. And I mean, not that you can't use groups like LGBT activists are pushing for LGBT rights, right? Like that would be a fair assumption of that group. But to say that every single person under that moniker that were being activists for LGBT rights had the same motivations for doing so, well, that would be just incorrect.
Right. There are all kinds of cognitive shortcuts that we take as humans to try to make sense of the world, and this is one of them. It's kind of basic social psychology that we tend to group people, and sometimes that could be very helpful. Again, going back to kind of an evolutionary psychology perspective, it could be very helpful for quick threat identification. But in a complex society, it can also cause some big problems, and it ties into this idea of conspiracy theories. So we've touched on a couple examples of conspiracy theories. And before we get into these, it's really interesting. And I was just thinking about it. I know that both you and I have conspiracy theory adherents in broader parts of our extended families, in our kind of broader group of acquaintances and things. We see these because you can tell when they post certain things on social media and so forth, and it's really problematic, right?
In the
Um,
military,
y-
on my street, in corporations that we've done and organizations we've done consulting engagements from, it's everywhere. And it's because
right.
we're a creative, imaginative species.
Yeah. And I think it'd be dangerous to assume that it's just that, people do this because maybe they aren't as smart as you are or something, right? There are a variety of reasons why different conspiracy theories can be very attractive to folks. But, some classic examples of conspiracy theories, certainly, going back to some classic ones related to, unidentified flying objects, extraterrestrial life, the stuff out in Roswell, New Mexico, and Area 51. Lots of conspiracy theories there. Lots of good fodder for movies, of course. We mentioned the Kennedy assassination. All the evidence seems to suggest that it was a man named Lee Harvey Oswald who did it. But there's a variety of different conspiracy theories that go around with regard to that. One in a recent episode, you mentioned some of the horrible ones related to Sandy Hook, which Sandy Hook is an elementary school in the United States that back in late 2012, a deranged young man went into a classroom and shot a bunch of children and teachers and then himself. It was horrific, right?
And I would just want to say something. One of the fathers there, like he's had to move several times. his wife divorced him because he got, I'm sure she was just sick of the stress. Gun bullets have been shot at his house.
Yeah. Well, because of
And
what conspiracy theory?
because the kids were government paid actors,
Yeah.
and this was a government plot, anti-gun type plot.
Right.
And
That's the conspiracy theory. Right.
yeah, that the government is after your guns. And it didn't matter if he had birth certificates. He would talk, and I'll have to find this podcast and we'll put it in the show notes. He would talk, here's a birth certificate. What evidence can I show you that and Ben, you recently lost your son, so you can resonate with this. What evidence can I show you that this really happened to me and my family and that my kid's no longer alive? Literally nothing could get through to the conspiracy theorists on this. Nothing. And put yourself in the shoes of that parent. To somebody that is lost in the delusional sauce, what could you do? Bring them to their house?
Yeah.
Dig up the remains? Those are fake remains. I mean, anything somebody can do. It crosses a threshold when no evidence can convince you, you by definition are unreasonable. You cannot use reason to reach your mind. And since conspiracy thinking is so rampant, we must all guard our minds from this kind of garbage that can easily infect, because it's how our minds survived. It's built into our survival stuff. But when this thinking thing goes overboard, you get to a case where you have such a tragic event. And then not only does insult to injury, people who think he's part of a government conspiracy are driving by it, putting his address out on the internet, driving by his house and pumping a full of bullets in his direction.
Ridiculous. Yeah, and despicable. Yeah, and other conspiracy theories that we've heard and sometimes are common. You hear things about like the moon landing being fake. All these conspiracy theories about the link between vaccines and autism. The 9/11 attacks were an inside job. All those types of things, and of course we mentioned QAnon, and we'll put a link to that article in the show notes. So there are many examples of conspiracy theories, and this is not a new thing, right? Conspiracy theories have been around for a very long time, as we've mentioned.
And if you're a betting person, always bet against the conspiracy. Because out of a million trillion conspiracies, one might be true. So if you just wanted to be math-minded, you just bet against all the conspiracies. But there have been actual conspiracies, right? The cigarette companies.
Right.
They hid the health risks of tobacco. And it took some amazing investigative journalism and stuff to pull that out.
Yeah. I mean, there were people involved, for example, in doing some secretive tape recording of conversations at the Democratic National Committee offices or whatever in the Watergate Hotel, right? Like these things do happen, but that is not evidence that suggests that the various items that the adherents of, for example, QAnon suggests, that's not evidence that those are true, right? So, our minds are very susceptible to this type of thinking. But, it also raises the question of why should we care? I mean, some people...
Yeah, I thought this podcast was about flourishing at work.
And beyond. Yeah.
And beyond.
Yeah. I mean, so I guess, are conspiracy theories harmful?
Yes, they are. Now, hey, they can be benign. We're like, oh, that's Uncle Fred. Hey, Uncle Fred, why don't you have another beer and go sit outside with the dogs? Okay, great. Hey, Fred's outside with the dogs. We can talk about normal stuff now. Yeah, it's more than just this annoyance at Thanksgiving or Christmas meals, right? Mm-hmm. This is something that caused people to bum rush the Capitol, right?
Right.
This is something that caused somebody to shoot up a pizza restaurant, to go kick open a door, to go down to the basement and release a bunch of kids that Hillary Clinton and other people were running in some pedophile ring, and only to find out, oh my God, there is no basement to this pizza place.
Hmm.
Um, because it takes so only these types of delusions could get a good person to do a bad thing. Because arguably, if our elections were stolen, or arguably, if there was a pedophile ring that nobody was doing anything about, the most ethical thing you could ever do would be kick the door down and get those kids out,
Right.
right? That is something admirable. But the problem is because these are baseless claims, because there is not evidence. The lack of evidence becomes evidence. Now you have good people who actually make the world awesome and who build society and are loving parents and contributors to the community. Now they're doing deluded, deranged things that are harmful, maybe even killing other people based on false premises.
Right. So the reason that conspiracy theories can be and oftentimes are rather dangerous is that they can influence behavior. You mentioned the January 6th incident, using that term very broadly at the U.S. Capitol. You had many of those people had conspiracy theory ideas and were going in there to do the work and to make things right in their minds, right? So conspiracy theories can be used to justify violence, treating other people poorly. They also can really undermine public institutions and trust. In the ways, for example, that our government works, or in those powerful positions. Because if the powerful people are all conspiring to do something, then why should we trust them, right? And that's very problematic when we start to lose our faith in our public institutions and when we lose our faith in, for example, science and medical information.
Yeah. So, and I see now I don't have research evidence, but I'm going to go out on a plank on this one. When your life has been, I know that when I was starting my career, I worked some lower level jobs, right? And the ethical criteria for how managers at that level treated me and my fellow employees was bad. There was a general, that they became the man, and the man is horrible. The man doesn't give a rip about you. And that's why you would go like a million miles if you just happened to have a good manager that gave you half a time a day. And when you grow up in that kind of situation, so this, if you're in a leadership position within an organization, it behooves you to have ethical treatment of individuals and other people because otherwise you're just feeding into that thing that powerful people can't be trusted.
Mm,
You,
yeah.
why would I trust you? I'm 45 years old now, and I've had nothing but bad interactions with people of power that didn't have my best interest in means. They're either selling me some kind of fish oil, snake oil garbage on the web. I remember when I was a kid, this water gun shoots 100 feet. I'm like, man, I got to save up for this thing. And so I get it home. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to blast my buddies from 100 feet. And it shot like 6 feet. I was like, where'd they do the testing? They shoot this off the Empire State Building with the backwind? I was so mad. I was crushed. False advertisement, puffery, all this kind of stuff yields to people not having trust. And
Yeah.
then when they go to make sense of the world, they're like, well, which option shows the people in power, institutions, medicine, science, all that stuff to have the least trust? That's the one I'm going with because guess what? That's what the world's been for me to date.
Right. So, what you're hinting at here, and I think are making the point quite well, is that the way in which we experience life oftentimes is through our organizations. This is an organizational life in our society. We are born into organizations, we participate in various types of organizations, we work in organizations, we are surrounded by either virtually or maybe in person sometimes people who work with us and people for whom we report or to whom we report, um, different hierarchies. And as you mentioned, Chris, when you have people in those positions of authority who over time continually make bad decisions, they undermine trust and confidence, they do things that are unethical, that makes a society in which, you know, from my perspective, makes conspiracy theories much more plausible, right? Of course, I'm going to believe in this secret, group of people who are doing bad things, because every experience I've had with people in positions of authority has been negative. Let's move on now. I think this is a great place to segue into, what can we do about it? Do about this, problem of conspiracy theories as leaders, as organizations, as people who are trying to make the world a better place, which I know all listeners of the Indigo podcast are trying to make the world a better place. So what can we do about it? And let's focus on leaders and organizations here. So what are some things that leaders and organizations can do?
First of all, don't shortcut challenging problems. So
Mm,
you've got an incident that happened. Maybe there's an accident on the manufacturing floor, or maybe something went down. If you lie about what really went on out of ease rather than having the guts and the moral fortitude and spine to stand up there and be ethical in your communications, well, just expect a bunch of, conspiracy thinkings, because actually you were covering it up.
hmm
You're feeding this idea that people can't be trusted. And this can be some of the goose. What was a goose kills? You kill the goose that laid the golden egg,
hmm
right? You can, you know, be Easter Island where you like burned all your trees to move big stone heads. I don't know if that's the real case on Easter Island, but you know, you you could burn all your trees to move stone heads and then find that you're living on a barren land of no trust. And then you're like, well, now we got to do a turnaround because economic factors have shifted. And you need to pull those levers and have an organization that can fire on all cylinders. But guess what? You burned all your trees. You got no fuel. You can't get anywhere.
Right. Yeah, so I think, at the top of of an organization, and not even at the top. I think, yeah, at the executive level for sure, but certainly even, down at the director, the manager, the frontline supervisor levels, you need to promote and be a good role model for decision making and critical thinking. Don't jump to the easy solutions if they aren't the right ones. You need to be reluctant to simplify things that are complex, because that's sloppy thinking. And when we model that in our organizations, then we're contributing as leaders, contributing as managers to the idea that that's okay. And that's the way the world works. Again, life as we experience it is oftentimes through our organizations. And when our organizations are, inculcating this atmosphere of low trust, sloppy thinking, then guess what? Should we be surprised that people are thinking in bad ways outside of work? No.
Right. And here's some of the things. You guys got to have professional models for decision making. If how do you evolve or think about risk? Are you using a composite risk management approach? How do you think about thinking? If it's just like, people present me all this data, but then I just go with what I'm feeling. There can be an element of guess, but if you don't have some kind of format about how you think about things, you need to get some coaching and training here. Um, there's just too much by the seat of the pants that Ben and I see when we're out in organizations. And
hmm
there are better ways forward. You owe it to your people to learn those better ways and model those better ways of thinking.
That's right. So I think it also has to do with, how you're going to engage with conspiracy thinking if it comes up in your organization. I think part of this, as we've discussed, Chris, is defining, what is the realm of legitimate debate in the organization? Are just accusations good enough for evidence? What do we do with things that are unfalsifiable in our organizations? How do we deal with that type of thinking? And that's where leaders need to put on their thinking caps and engage in a thoughtful, respectful, yet I think principled way about how we do our thinking.
Right. Because we have not done this, people in the public forum can get away with all kinds of shenanigans. One of the articles, and we'll put a link to this. I forget where it was. We've got it somewhere in the notes, but this person out of Harvard, another person out of Dartmouth, were doing research on like kind of refreshing our conspiracy thinking science and stuff. And one of the things is conspiracies used to have a theory behind them. There is, well, we know this because of that. And so, they were trying to, come up with some kind of theory, some kind of cobbled together evidence. But in the modern environment, people are just saying stuff without any justification. Here's one I heard from a neighbor. This isn't about Joe Biden's presidency. They're going to kill Joe Biden so Kamala can be president.
Right.
But, well, based on what? Dude, they're just going to do it. Yeah, but anything, any theory here. No, it's just, mark my words, it's just going to happen. And there's no theory behind the conspiracy. You are now so intellectually bereft, if you're coming from that place, that there's hard to move forward. And one of the things we can do as leaders and stuff within an organization is demand accusation does not equal evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so we embrace evidence-based thinking here. You must provide evidence for the stuff you assert. Because we haven't modeled these behaviors nor demanded that from the people around us in the public forum, weirdos can get on the web and weirdo politicians can get elected that just say stuff that's just impossible. That's just, it's impossible. And they get away with it because our populace will accept those kinds of bad, and I can't even call them arguments. They're just bald assertions based on nothing.
Right. So as a leader in an organization, I think engaging when necessary is certainly important. If people have legitimate concerns, get to the bottom of them. If people have fears and, you as an organization or a leader are hiding stuff, yeah, they're going to rely on some of this flawed or baseless sense making that we've been talking about. I think also, getting to know your people is important, just as a basic leadership thing. Leadership is fundamentally about relationships that you have with the people around you. And to the degree that people think that, you care about them and value what they do, they're going to, have a higher quality relationship with you, and they're going to reciprocate by working harder and being more committed and so forth. This is a kind of the way it works. But, getting to know your people is important because then, you can know what are their concerns. What are they scared of? Conspiracy theories, as we mentioned earlier, can be particularly attractive to those people who are feeling afraid. They feel powerless. If you can imagine, if you've been in a job for a couple decades, maybe where you've never had any power, every leader you've had has just, in your mind, conspired against you, done unethical things, to suck more life out of you and get more work out of you for the least amount of return, then yeah, you're going to be very attracted to these ideas of conspiracies, because it makes sense to the world. It says, yeah, this is why things are messed up, because there's a secret group. So those are some things that you can do as a leader in an organization. Maybe we can draw our attention now to a great article that we came across in MIT Technology Review, and we'll post a link to this one in the show notes as well. And this article is how to talk to conspiracy theorists, and has some good suggestions that maybe we can share with our listeners. This comes from July 15th of 2020, so it's a relatively recent article. And let's talk through some of these things, because as I mentioned, we all know some of these people, I think. And I think fundamentally, and this is number one in their list of how to talk to a conspiracy theorist, is speaking respectfully. And what it says in the article, they suggest always speak respectfully. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind, because, you get farther with honey than you do with vinegar. And I see a lot of vinegar out there these days.
Yeah, you earn good faith. I know I engage in debates online, and it's something that I enjoy, but it's something that I think is required as a civic duty. When you see baloney out there, you have to say, wait a minute, I hear what you're saying, but where's the evidence for that? Right?
Mhm.
Something you could do is direct message somebody off of the public forum so they're less defensive when they're one-on-one than when their public reputation is at risk.
Right.
Right? So you think about, hey, it could be fair. What evidence do you have for that? I
Yeah.
just don't find that evidence compelling because of the following reasons. Now, I think online forum discussion can have different rules. So, for instance, we know from the data that 10% of people that post generate or that are on a forum generate 90% of the content. Most people are just passively viewing. So if your interactions in the public forum are not only to try to reach out to that person, but also be compelling and convincing to people who might be on the border of dipping into radicalized land, conspiracy theory land,
Hmm.
well, you can do a broader, you can actually punch above your weight on social media, which is a cool data tool that people that aren't engaged in conspiracy thinking can use to have a bigger impact, right?
Right. Yeah. And so, we mentioned that conspiracy theories have been around forever. But one thing that is different now in recent years is that, with social media, information can spread much more quickly. So, interestingly, like if you do some of the research in this area, there's an area of research on information propagation in terms of how messaging gets spread out throughout our society. And social media certainly can accelerate that and can give a bigger microphone to people. And as you mentioned, the communication in public forums on the web can be very tricky. And I always think about Godwin's law or Godwin's rule, right? Which is it's an internet adage, right? And we'll post a link to this in the show notes as well. So he was an attorney and author, and he one time stated that if an online discussion, regardless of topic or scope, goes on long enough, sooner or later, someone will compare someone or something to Adolf Hitler or his deeds. At the point at which effectively the discussion or thread ends, right? And you do see this. Some people will either, and if it's not, a Nazi analogy, it'll be something else that's similar, where there'll be these ad hominem attacks and so forth that will be unproductive to the overall conversation. So keep that in mind. I think respect is helpful. Going private. This was you mentioned this, and this is another point brought up in this article about how to talk to conspiracy theorists. And when you take something into a one-on-one communication versus in front of other people, it takes that social pressure away. Because when we are either talking, in a group, or if we are posting online, there's this public face that we're trying to maintain, and it's a lot harder psychologically for us to say, "Oops, yeah, you're probably right. I didn't really think that much before I posted that."
Or they'll just ignore you, but then they'll
Sure.
change their view because of like somebody will call me on my baloney later, right? One
Right.
of the thing is they talk about this article that's really good that we'll spring off of is you can ask people, what would it take to change your mind?
Mm,
I do this with people that deny climate change. I say, okay, what experiment hasn't been done to date that really needs to be done to show that this is true or false? And most of the time they'll run away sad, they're like, oh, but some of them will say something and I can just go to Google Scholar and generally I'm like, look here, that experiment's already been done 20 times.
hmm
I see this with some soldiers that don't want to take the vaccine because it's not mandatory yet. Well, just more people need to take it. Okay, well, there was 35,000 people in the Moderna case study, and we've given over 5 million, I think it's 5.2 million some odd doses in the US thus far.
hmm
And I don't say that. Sometimes, how many would you need to take it? Like a million? Yeah, good. We're at 5 million. So line up and get your vaccine.
hmm
Um, or, but the real problem is it is a methodological error of their thinking, right? I
hmm
don't feel comfortable with this now. What would it take to feel comfortable? I don't know. I'm just waiting on my emotions to catch up. We can't, and with as complex as our society is, we can't just go on feelings alone. What's that Ben Shapiro quote? Facts don't care about your feelings. And we'll leave the problems of Ben Shapiro aside, but they don't. The facts don't care. And so, you know, when you say, okay, well, 1 million, why would 1 million be enough? Why not 4 million? Why
hmm
not 3 million? And then you can say like, hey, listen, I sympathize. I empathize with how you're feeling right now. But the way you're going about this isn't disciplined thought process.
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, another tactic you could potentially consider, again, drawing from this article, is trying the truth sandwich, right? Where you state a fact and then, mention the fallacy and then a fact. So, this is an interesting approach. So, for example, there was one conspiracy about how 5G, was causing the spread of coronavirus or something like that, right? And, what they suggest in this article is you could structure your argument such as, and I'm quoting, coronavirus is an airborne virus, which means it is passed by sneezing, coughing, or particles. Because viruses are not transmitted via radio waves, coronavirus, which is an airborne virus, can't be carried by 5G, right? So that can be a way, perhaps, to structure some of your arguments.
That's always a downer. I was always that guy at the party, and somebody says something, and you're like, that's just absolutely not true.
Mm-hmm.
What? You're like, because of this. And then they're like, man, why? Like, I don't know. Like,
I bet you're a lot of fun at cocktail parties.
There is studies. There is studies about bullshit. Okay. And I use that term not in the potty mouth kind of way, but as an actual term about people that just spew stuff without evidence. And people, what we learned from the bullshit studies, and now I'll have to put some more in the show notes. It's going to be a challenging show notes episode, but is that bullshit doesn't thrive where facts and truth are valued.
Right.
And so if you create a culture with your organization, team, society that just doesn't put up with people spewing whatever without any fact checks, without it, the fact checkers are just a bunch of liberals with cats sitting on their couch eating Cheetos. Well, what does that have to do with the fact?
Mm-hmm.
That's an ad hominem attack. Like, you've got to learn these different pieces, but we can stop this by insisting on evidence every step of the way.
Right. And I would encourage our listeners to go check out the episode that we did with Rob Breener, all about evidence-based practice, evidence-based management.
Awesome.
That way of thinking can be applied much more broadly outside of management and leadership, HR, all that kind of stuff. And it's helpful, right? Because like you said, the BS doesn't thrive or can't thrive in an environment in which facts, truth are valued. So create that culture in your organization. How do we determine what is truth in our organization? What is our kind of our cultural norm around that? That's a helpful way to think about it.
Sometimes the subway, the bus has already left the station. That guy, you're never getting him out of that whatever conspiracy. But one of the things that I've noticed anecdotally about conspiracies is they become less important the further we get away from them. There's probably some Revolutionary Wars conspiracies that we'll never hear about because nobody cares. We're not at the Revolutionary War.
Mm-hmm.
How important right now is the moon landing fake or not? I don't know. We got 1 billion satellites up there running my Google Maps GPS style, Like it just becomes less and less important. So sometimes the bus has already left the station. That person is going to go. And I call this the clawback. And I'm sure somebody else smarter's thought about it. This is just kind of in my experiments with people is, okay, let's say that's true. Let's say it's all about killing Joe Biden so Kamala can be the real president. If Joe Biden did 2 full terms and that didn't happen, what would need to change in your evidence gathering and thinking for you to avoid that error in the future? Right? Because a lot of these will have a timeline, right? And you'll see these in cults. And this is as somebody who was raised in a quasi-evangelical cult. My apologies for the good evangelicals out there. You're all not cult members. I know. But as for somebody that came out of that background, there would be forecasts about God coming back at a certain date. And then it would pass and they'd be like, oh, we missed it. It was actually 5 more years down the road. Can I still have a speaking in book deal? But right. I mean, this is like, we have had times, cult members in the US that get together. We have that term, drink the Kool-Aid, where everybody drank poison Kool-Aid so they could go to the alien mothership. Or, we have that's why these things are dangerous. And we kind of chuckle about them. But I want to say that this stuff is about life and death. And if our entire society globally cannot have discussions based on facts, we are doomed. Now, thankfully, enough people hold on to facts and give a rip that we're not quite at that place yet. But let us not play with fire, right?
Right.
So when the bus has left the station with a dear friend, uncle, family member, somebody in society, you can say, okay, well, let's just write this one down. Here's what's going to happen and why. And then ask them to do some, hey, they're already conspiracy minded, so their imagination's pretty good, right? If this doesn't happen, what will you change in how you think and perceive the world so you're not so wrong in the
Yeah.
future?
I mean, I could imagine that working to some degree with some people. I think with some others, it won't work. And the reason that it won't work with everyone is that, you mentioned the cult mentality. And I think that that is something that's going on with some conspiracy theories. There is just getting on maybe a little bit of a tangent here, but, I think in American society and perhaps society in other parts of the world as well, the various pieces of our social fabric that keep us together. For me, it's certainly my Catholic faith, with other civic organizations, participation in other types of activities that bind us together and have us working and worshiping or doing whatever alongside people who may have different political views. Those types of ties have weakened over the decades, and that creates an environment in which there's an increased appetite and attraction to something that can bind me to other people. So if I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling powerless, I'm afraid, and there's a global pandemic, and the wrong people on the wrong side are doing things, and it's making me mad, I will seek like-minded people. It's part of our human nature. And if I don't have those other social fabric pieces to bring me into something that's productive, yeah, these conspiracy theories can become your religion. Politics can become your religion. And that I think is dangerous. And that is part of what's contributing to some of the nastiness that we see in the world today.
Yeah. As good as the Lawfare blog is, it's not worth your faith. But here's the thing I see is the people that are really smart on this stuff, it's almost like, oh, did you see that article that I published in Politico? And they're having a conversation amongst really smart people. Meanwhile, people who maybe went into one of the trades or has to work 2 jobs or, they have a variety of things. We leave these people out in the dark. One of the theories I have for why doctors and lawyers are so respected is because of a lot of towns, but pre-internet, they might have been the only person with a graduate degree in that town.
Sure.
And so you'd go see a doctor and lawyer for any old question. Hey, I read this in the paper. What do you think? Because they had training in, like, especially if you're a lawyer, in argument, right? And we need to pass those skills down to people that aren't going to crack, the greatest hits on dialectic from Greek times to the present. They're not going to crack that book. But guess what? They need those skills on dialectic. And they also need civic engagement. An article that I will put in the show notes talks about one of the biggest predictors of civic engagement is socioeconomic status. And so if you're at the bottom just hustling, you believe I'm self-reliant, I'm going to pay my own way, pay my own taxes, these are people that they don't have a lot of them don't have the leisure time to get civically engaged. 2, they don't have a mental model. These are good people with great ideas. You want to do policy, if you're on the left, you want to do policy that benefits the poor, and you haven't been poor, and you haven't really gone down and done focus groups and really get in the sauce with the poor, well, your best laid intentions are going to go awry. But the problem is you got the people, some of these people at a lower level of socioeconomic stuff, and there's a lot of different lenses. Don't stone me for not bringing every lens on this issue. But if they don't know how to organize to affect policy to actually help them on the things that it's like, you know what? You gave me a hammer, but really I needed a screwdriver. And this is
Hmm.
what a screwdriver looked like. It needed to have a red handle, be 8.5 inches long. They have very specific ideas about what would help them and be meaningful to them. Well, we are failing as a society to not equip people with civic engagement. Another piece of this thing is, we're kind of lazy as humans. If everything's going good, we're not like, I'm going to phone my congressman right now. It's only when we're like, yeah, I'm so angry. And I'm going to send emails and I'm going to just post articles that I didn't even fully read. I'm just going to click share on them on Facebook. Alert, they're angry, right? Well, it is hard to maintain civic engagement across the long term. Something gets people riled up, they do it. Now, the problem is we've got a section of our society that doesn't know how to organize to impact policy and laws and things that will help them. And they have low civic engagement because, everything's been a kick in the pants. Nobody gives a rip. It's just easy to just run
Yeah.
ripshot.
Well, we also have a political system that rewards people and elects people who don't have policy ideas in general, right?
Well,
Regardless
that's
of whether or
been
not
some
they're
of
on
the
the
new
right or
stuff that's
left.
written
Yeah.
about. Like, so we have post-theory conspiracy, like it's just a conspiracy without any theory behind it. We now have post-policy politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And that all they do is play on cultural grievances or whatever's the latest. They probably have an analytics team that says, well, what's trending now on Google? Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I'll say. And that's it. But that doesn't get policy done over the long haul. And
Mm-hmm.
and all that to say is low engagement, bad leadership that takes advantage of people, causes uncertainty, distrust, that causes lack of faith in institution leaders, that causes massive conspiracy thinking. And now we want a real, this isn't even putting the cat in the bag. This is putting 8 rabid cats that have been squirted with water guns into the bag, and they all have to go in at the same time. Like that's what we're dealing with.
Now, really important. Were they squirted with your faulty false advertising?
Yes,
water
with
gun?
my false advertisement water gun. But the whole point is, guys, we didn't get here overnight. Now, this conspiracy thinking is something that's just baked into our creative humanity. It's a positive. We need creativity to make the science that's going to make life better for tomorrow. But we didn't get here overnight. But it's going to take a concerted effort. One,
Yeah.
you got to get, how do you address these conspiracy theories? Right? You've got to know that, and then you got to start doing. And
Right.
the final thing I'll go, so I just don't talk all the whole time, and Ben's over here is like, God, when are you going to shut up, Chris? and the other piece is you got to make civic engagement a part of your life practice. That, if you make sure you work out every day, or if you go to the yoga studio once a week, you need to have a commitment to some kind of civic engagement that's not just when you're hacked off about stuff.
Yeah. We get the world that we participate in. So, I think just to kind of bring this down the home stretch a little bit, today we talked about conspiracy theories. We tried to share a little bit of the research and thought behind conspiracy theories. And bringing this back to an organizational context and some things that you can do as a leader and as an organization to help with the conversations, to help with the thinking that's going on in our society, have to do with being a good role model. Don't participate in this stuff, and find some smart ways to engage with it when you see it. We will have a number of resources, as we've already mentioned, in the show notes for you to check out. But this is something where, we as a society, or even you as a leader in your organization, you will get what you tolerate around you. And when you tolerate these types of ideas, and when you tolerate bad faith arguments, that's what you're going to get. So we all have an ability, and I think, as you mentioned, Chris, an obligation to get engaged, to make the world a better place. We can do that starting at a home. We can do that starting in our organizations, and then get out there in civic society. Thanks for listening to the Indigo Podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider helping us by rating us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, telling your friends about us, having us on your podcast, or mentioning us on social media. Our website is www.indigopodcast.com, where you can access more information about us and this episode. Thanks again, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.